Last night marked my 34th birthday. I spent the first 2 hours of it sitting by myself at one of the city's priciest restaurants, watching the waiter's expression gradually change from courteous to sympathetic. My girlfriend, Isabella, was running late. Not exactly a surprise, but 2 hours was impressive, even for her. I'd called. No reply. Just as I was ready to give up and head home, she finally decided to show. But she didn't come alone. She walked in hand with a guy I'd never seen before, some smug-looking man with a flawless haircut and a luxury watch glinting under the lights. She leaned in, kissed him right there in front of me, and said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "See? Told you he'd still be here waiting, like a pathetic puppy." I didn't flinch. I just smiled, stood up, and shook the guy's hand. This morning, my phone showed 78 missed calls. Her things? Packed neatly into garbage bags, sitting outside the apartment. The same one she just found out belongs to that so-called pathetic puppy. They stopped right beside my table. Isabella didn't even glance in my direction. Instead, she leaned in and kissed the guy, long, deliberate, and right there in the middle of the packed restaurant. Then she turned toward him, her voice carrying just enough for everyone nearby to hear. "See? Told you he'd still be sitting here like a pathetic puppy." The guy laughed quietly. The entire place went silent. I could feel the weight of dozens of stares waiting for me to explode, but nothing came. No shouting, no scene. Just this strange, steady calm washing over me. The pain and fury were still there, but distant, sealed off behind a wall of glass. I looked at Isabella's smug, victorious expression, then at the man beside her, his confidence already fading now that the little show was done. I smiled, a real, effortless smile. Standing up, I straightened my jacket and held out my hand to him. "Congratulations," I said evenly. "You've clearly won the prize." He hesitated, eyes darting between us, but shook my hand anyway. I placed a $100 bill on the table to cover the drinks I'd had while waiting, nodded to the speechless waiter, and said, "Have a good night." Then I walked out. No running, no storming off, just leaving. The cool night air outside felt incredible, like the first breath of freedom. The so-called pathetic puppy had finally slipped his leash, and he was heading home to burn down the whole doghouse. As for Isabella, our story was pretty textbook. We met 2 years ago, and for the first year, everything seemed perfect. She was fun, affectionate, and seemed to admire my drive. I've always been private about money. Learned long ago that showing off only draws the wrong crowd. My penthouse is nice, but understated. My car reliable, but unremarkable. My clothes well-fitted, but not designer. Isabella knew I was doing fine, but she never knew how well. I let her believe I was just comfortably employed. I wanted her to like me, not my bank account. But over the past year, the mask started to slip. Little by little, the entitlement crept in. She used to complain that my car wasn't a Mercedes, that we didn't take enough spontaneous trips to Europe. Bit by bit, she stopped treating me like a partner and started acting like I was some kind of personal service provider. Her own job was always a little murky, something to do with social media consulting from home, but it never seemed to generate any real income. I covered everything: groceries, vacations, her car payments, and that ever-growing closet of designer clothes. At first, I didn't mind. I loved her, and I could easily afford it. But over time, her gratitude faded into entitlement. Her affection became a transaction, surfacing only when she wanted something pricey. She loved telling people that we lived in her apartment. It was this odd little quirk I never bothered to correct. "You have to come by my place," she gushed to her friends. I let her choose most of the furniture because I wanted her to feel comfortable. What I didn't realize was that she was creating her own story, one where she was the lady of a home she didn't actually own. That pathetic puppy comment wasn't just a jab. It was a glimpse into how she truly saw me: loyal, obedient, always waiting for her no matter how cruel she became. She had no idea that the so-called puppy didn't just live in the penthouse. He actually owned the entire building. I'd bought the whole complex 4 years earlier as an investment through a holding company. It turned out to be one of my smartest financial decisions. Isabella knew I had investments, but she assumed it was just the usual, some stocks, maybe a few bonds. She never cared enough to ask for details. Money, to her, was about spending, not earning. My landlord, the management company that handled all the day-to-day operations of the property, was technically on my payroll. When I got home from the restaurant, the first thing I did was head straight for the spare bedroom, which had long since become her walk-in closet. Rows upon rows of clothes, shoes, and designer handbags worth more than my car lined the space. I didn't bother with suitcases. Instead, I grabbed a box of heavy-duty black garbage bags from the storage closet and got to work. I stripped the hangers bare. Dresses, coats, jeans, everything went into the bags. Her shoes followed, then her makeup, her jewelry box, her laptop, all of it. I moved through the room calmly, almost mechanically. No anger, no sadness, just focus. It felt less like a breakup and more like cleaning up a mess. An hour later, 12 large garbage bags sat lined up, full of what had once been her life. I dragged them out one by one and stacked them neatly in the hallway outside my door. Then I called a 24-hour locksmith. While waiting for him to arrive, I made one last sweep through the apartment, collecting anything else that was hers: framed photos, little keepsakes, a few books. Those went into a smaller bag, which I placed carefully on top of the others. The locksmith showed up around midnight, a weary-looking guy who'd clearly seen his share of late-night drama. Domestic chaos. He swapped out the locks on both the front door and the service entrance quickly and efficiently. I handed him cash. He gave a tired nod, and just like that, he was gone. The apartment was officially mine again. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sank into the couch, staring at the space that suddenly felt bigger, quieter, cleaner. The silence was perfect. Then my phone started buzzing. Isabella. I let it ring out and go straight to voicemail. A few minutes later, a text popped up. Where did you go? That wasn't funny. I deleted it without replying. Another call followed, this time from a number I didn't recognize, but I could guess who it was. Ignored. I set my phone to silent, turned on the TV, and let the calm settle in. The calls and messages kept coming. A relentless digital storm I no longer cared about. When I woke up the next morning, I felt better than I had in years. Out of curiosity, I checked my phone. 78 missed calls. A mix of Isabella, the new guy, whose name, I'd learned from her screaming voicemails, was Julian, and a few of her friends. The voicemails told quite the story. The first few were angry, full of confusion and disbelief. Then came the panic, as it dawned on her that I wasn't answering. By the early morning, the messages had shifted into a chaotic blend of tearful apologies and venomous threats. It was the sound of a narcissist realizing the game was over. The real entertainment started around 9. I was in my home office when a sudden noise caught my attention on the security camera feed. Out in the hallway stood Isabella and Julian, frozen in front of the pile of garbage bags. Isabella's face was twisted in pure fury. She started kicking the garbage bags, screaming about how her expensive clothes were ruined. Julian stood frozen beside her, visibly uneasy, a bystander in a performance that was clearly going off script. Then she began pounding on my door, shouting my name over and over. I let her rage for a few minutes, quietly watching through the camera feed, amused by the spectacle. Finally, I cracked the door open just enough for her to see me. She froze, startled. "What is this?" she shrieked, pointing at the pile of bags. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "Those are your things," I said evenly. "I figured you'd be needing them." "You threw my stuff out like garbage," she screamed. "And my key doesn't work. You're going to let me into my apartment right now." I couldn't help the small smile that tugged at my lips. "I think you're mistaken," I said quietly. "This isn't your apartment." The expression that spread across her face was priceless, a mix of shock and confusion, like her brain couldn't quite process the words. "What are you talking about?" "Of course it is. My name's on the lease." "No," I said. "It's not. You've never seen a lease, never signed one, and you've certainly never paid rent." I watched the color drain from her face as realization started to hit. "This is my apartment," I continued, my tone calm but unyielding. "In fact, it's my building. I own it. Every unit. The pathetic puppy you laughed at last night, he's your landlord, or at least he was." I paused, then added, Your tenancy, which was always unofficial, is now over. You have 10 minutes to remove your trash from my hallway before I have security handle it." She just stared at me, mouth hanging open, completely speechless. Julian looked like he'd seen a ghost, instinctively stepping back, as if putting distance between himself and the disaster unraveling in front of him. Isabella finally found her voice. Her voice finally broke through, barely above a whisper. "You're lying." Without a word, I reached back into the apartment and took a folder from the hall table. From it, I pulled out a copy of the building's deed, my name and my holding company's name printed clearly across the top. I held it up for her to see. The silence that followed was perfect. In that instant, her entire reality, the one built on her illusion of control and my supposed weakness, shattered completely. She wasn't the powerful woman who had her boyfriend under her thumb anymore. She was just a freeloader who'd been evicted by the man she'd publicly humiliated only hours before. "You can't do this," she stammered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I have nowhere to go." "That sounds like a personal issue," I said evenly. "Maybe Julian can help you. You two seemed pretty close last night." I turned my gaze toward Julian, who was already edging toward the elevator, clearly desperate to escape. He hadn't signed up for this kind of scene. He wanted the thrill, not the consequences. 9 minutes, I said, and closed the door, turning the deadbolt with a solid click. On the security feed, I watched as Isabella crumpled onto the pile of garbage bags, sobbing uncontrollably. Julian lingered just long enough to mumble something inaudible, then bolted for the elevator. He was gone. She was left alone with her pile of trash. The smear campaign came next, naturally. A few hours later, she must have pulled herself together and gathered her things, because the hallway was empty. But that's when my phone started lighting up with messages from mutual friends. "Dude, what happened? Isabella says you kicked her out for no reason." Apparently, she crafted a story about me having some kind of breakdown, claiming I'd thrown her out after she gently tried to end things. Of course, she skipped the part where she showed up to my birthday dinner with another man and called me a pathetic puppy in front of an entire restaurant. I didn't bother with arguments or drama. I sent one clear, factual message to a few key people. For my birthday, Isabella brought another man to dinner, kissed him in front of me, and told the room I was a pathetic puppy for waiting. I ended the relationship. The apartment she was living in rent-free, in a building I own, is no longer available to her. That's all. The truth spoke for itself. Several friends had actually been at the restaurant and witnessed the scene firsthand. Her version of events crumbled almost instantly. The same people who had texted me in concern soon followed up with shocked apologies. "I had no idea," one wrote. "She's insane," said another. Then came the financial revenge. The next day, I received a fraud alert from my credit card company, a decline charge of over $5,000 at a luxury handbag store. It was from a supplementary card I'd given Isabella long ago and completely forgotten about. I immediately called the company, reported it as stolen, and had it canceled. She'd apparently gone straight from being evicted to a shopping spree, assuming her gravy train was still running. The declined charge must have been yet another rude awakening. Her family stepped into the chaos a few days later. Her mother, a woman who had always spoken to me with that thin, polite edge of superiority, called in a full-blown rage. She screamed that I was a monster, a heartless, vindictive man who had thrown her poor, innocent daughter out into the street. I let her vent for a while before cutting in, calm and measured. "Ma'am," I said, "your daughter publicly humiliated me on my birthday with another man. She was living in my property rent-free, and that arrangement has now ended. If you have further concerns, you can take them up with my attorney." I gave her my lawyer's contact information, said goodbye, and hung up. About a week later came the final desperate act. I received an email from Julian, the man from the restaurant. To my surprise, it was an honest, apologetic message. He explained that Isabella had told him I was a controlling, emotionally abusive ex, and that she'd staged that restaurant scene as a way to free herself in public. But after what he'd witnessed at my apartment, he realized he'd been nothing more than a pawn in her manipulative game. He said she'd been calling him nonstop ever since, begging for help, money, a place to stay, until he finally blocked her number. He ended his email with one line, "You dodged a bullet, man." I didn't reply, but I appreciated the honesty. Word eventually reached me about what happened to her next. With no apartment and no income, she ended up moving back in with her parents. Her friends, exhausted by the endless drama and constant pleas for money, began to drift away. She'd built her entire image around a lifestyle she hadn't earned, one she couldn't maintain without me. Without the pathetic puppy she once mocked, her glamorous facade collapsed. Months passed, and the peace was glorious. I redecorated the apartment, made it truly mine again. I threw myself into work, took a trip with friends, and started enjoying the freedom I hadn't realized I was missing. One evening, my friends and I went out for drinks at a bar downtown, a place I hadn't been in ages. As we sat at our table, I happened to glance across the room. It was Isabella. She was working as a cocktail waitress. Our eyes met for a brief moment. The smug, victorious expression she'd worn that night at the restaurant was gone, replaced by something entirely new. Shame. She quickly looked away and vanished into the back. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no satisfaction, no gloating, just quiet closure. She tried to humiliate me, to make me feel small and pathetic. But in the end, her own choices had brought her exactly where she belonged. She was now working to serve people in the very kind of place where she once imagined she was the one being served.